The pen was halfway to the paper. That's what Layla Hashim would remember later. The CEO's fountain pen hovering over the signature line, maybe 3 inches from completing the transfer of $500 million. The conference room in the private estate was silent except for the scratch of leather against mahogany as someone shifted in their chair. Layla stood by the beverage cart, coffee pot in hand, watching a catastrophe unfold in real time. And then she heard it. One phrase. Just 5 words in what was supposed to be Arabic, spoken by the man in the expensive suit who'd been orchestrating this deal for weeks. Except the words weren't Arabic. They were gibberish. Mangled sounds that approximated the rhythm of the language, but meant absolutely nothing. And Layla, who'd spent 4 years translating for diplomats and businesspeople across 3 continents, knew in that instant that everything about this deal was a lie. She opened her mouth. The words came out before she could stop them. That's not Arabic. Her voice cut through the expensive silence like a knife. Every head in the room turned toward her. The CEO, Richard Navarro, looked up from the contract, his pen still suspended in midair. The man in the expensive suit, who'd introduced himself as Kareem al-Rashid, representative of a major Gulf state investment consortium, went perfectly still. And Layla's mother, who'd asked her daughter to help serve refreshments during this crucial meeting, looked absolutely horrified. But Layla couldn't stop now. She switched to actual Arabic, fluent and natural, and asked al-Rashid a simple question. What region of the Emirates are you from? Al-Rashid stared at her, his mouth open slightly. He didn't say a word, because he didn't understand. He had no idea what she just asked him. And in that moment of frozen incomprehension, everyone in the room realized that the man about to receive $500 million might not be who he claimed to be. But how did a maid's daughter end up holding the fate of a $500 million real estate deal in her hands? What was she even doing in that conference room? And why did her words in Arabic feel less like a question and more like an accusation that would unravel everything? For hours earlier, Layla had been sitting in traffic on the Pacific Coast Highway, annoyed that her Saturday plans were being disrupted by a favor for her mother. Her phone buzzed with another text. Please, Habibti. Just for a few hours. They need extra help, and I told them you could assist. It's very important. Layla sighed and typed back. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Her mother, Aisha Hashim, had worked as part of the housekeeping staff at the Belmont estate for 6 years. It was one of those old-money properties in Malibu. 12 bedrooms, ocean views, the kind of place where people who owned small countries came to vacation. The estate had changed hands a few years ago, purchased by Richard Navarro, a tech entrepreneur who'd sold his cybersecurity company for close to $2 billion and now spent his time managing investments and venture capital funds. Aisha had stayed on through the transition, grateful for steady employment that paid better than most housekeeping positions and came with decent benefits. Layla loved her mother fiercely. Aisha had raised her alone after Layla's father died when Layla was 8, a construction accident that left them with medical debt and no life insurance. Aisha had worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs to keep Layla in good schools, to make sure she had opportunities, to give her the education that would let her build a different kind of life. When Layla got accepted to UCLA, Aisha had cried with pride. When Layla graduated with honors and got hired by an international translation agency, Aisha had thrown a party for everyone in their apartment building. Now Layla worked as a freelance interpreter, specializing in Arabic and French. She'd spent 2 years after college living in Dubai, working for a translation service that catered to multinational corporations and government agencies. She'd learned not just modern standard Arabic, but also multiple dialects, Levantine, Egyptian, Gulf Arabic. She could navigate the subtle differences between how business was conducted in Riyadh versus Abu Dhabi versus Beirut. It was challenging work, but she loved it. Languages were puzzles, and Layla had always been good at puzzles. She'd moved back to Los Angeles 6 months ago, wanting to be closer to her mother and tired of the intensity of expat life in the Gulf. She was building up her freelance client base, taking on projects remotely, occasionally doing in-person interpretation for business meetings or legal proceedings. The work was inconsistent but interesting, and she was making it work, which was why spending her Saturday helping her mother serve refreshments at some rich guy's business meeting wasn't exactly how she'd planned to spend her day. But Aisha had sounded stressed on the phone, and Layla had learned long ago that when her mother asked for help, you said yes. That's what family did. Layla pulled up to the estate service entrance and found her mother waiting, already looking relieved. Thank you for coming, Habibti. I know this isn't what you wanted to do today. It's fine, Mama. Layla hugged her. What's going on? Why do they need extra help? Mr. Navarro is having a very important meeting. Business partners from overseas. He wants everything perfect. Fresh coffee every 30 minutes, pastries, fruit, water. The regular catering staff is handling lunch, but he wants someone in the room throughout the morning to make sure guests have everything they need. Usually I wouldn't be involved, but Elena called in sick and Mr. Navarro specifically requested that someone be there who knows how to be discreet. Aisha lowered her voice. This meeting is about a very large investment. Very large. Mr. Harrison, that's Mr. Navarro's lawyer, told me that absolutely nothing should disrupt the proceedings. And you volunteered me? Layla raised an eyebrow. I volunteered us, Aisha corrected. I'll handle the preparation. You'll handle the service during the meeting. You know how to move through a room without being noticed. You've worked at enough formal events. That was true. Layla had done her share of event interpretation, which often meant standing quietly in the background until needed. She knew how to be professionally invisible. All right, what do I need to know? Mr. Navarro and his team will be in the main conference room. The visitors arrived last night. They're staying in the guest wing. 3 men, all from the Middle East. Very polite, very formal. Mr. Navarro has been working on this deal for weeks. If it goes through. Aisha paused. Mr. Harrison said it would be one of the largest single investments Mr. Navarro has ever made. He's very excited. Layla followed her mother through the service corridors of the estate, past the industrial kitchen, where catering staff were preparing elaborate lunch platters, up a back staircase to the main floor. The Belmont estate was exactly what you'd expect from a tech billionaire's Malibu property. Minimalist luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows with ocean views, art that probably cost more than Layla's annual income. Everything was designed to impress while appearing effortless. The conference room was on the second floor, overlooking the Pacific. Layla helped her mother set up the beverage station, coffee urns, selections of tea, bottled water, fresh orange juice, an array of pastries from some expensive bakery. Everything was arranged on a rolling cart so they could refresh items without disrupting the meeting too much. You'll wheel this in at the start, Aisha explained, and then remain near the side wall in case anyone needs anything. Just be attentive but quiet. Don't speak unless spoken to. If they need anything special, you can slip out and let the kitchen know. I've got it, Mama. I've done this before. Aisha smiled, but Layla could see the tension around her eyes. Her mother took pride in her work, and a meeting this important must have felt high stakes. I know you have, Habibti. I just want everything to go smoothly. At 9:30, people began arriving in the conference room. Layla stood quietly by her cart, waiting. First came Richard Navarro, mid-40s, fit in that way wealthy people achieved through personal trainers and careful diets, dressed in expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than they looked. He nodded at Layla with a distracted smile and moved to the head of the conference table, where he began arranging documents. Next came a woman Layla didn't recognize, late 30s, sharp business suit, carrying a slim laptop and a leather portfolio. She introduced herself to Navarro as Jennifer Wu, representing one of his investment funds. Then came an older man, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was used to being the smartest person in any room. Navarro greeted him warmly. David, thanks for being here. I value your perspective on this. Wouldn't miss it, the man replied. Investment opportunities like this don't come along often. Then came the man who must be Navarro's lawyer, Preston Harrison, based on what Aisha had mentioned. Late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of person who radiated authority and trustworthiness. He had a leather briefcase and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades advising wealthy clients on how to protect and grow their fortunes. He exchanged pleasantries with Navarro, took a seat near the head of the table, and began pulling out documents. Finally, at 9:45, the overseas visitors arrived. 3 men, all dressed in traditional Gulf Arab business attire, thobes and keffiyehs, though tailored in a way that suggested wealth and status. The lead man was probably in his late 40s, distinguished-looking, with a carefully trimmed beard and an air of quiet authority. He extended his hand to Navarro with a warm smile. "Mr. Navarro, assalamu alaikum. I hope you rested well." "Wa alaikum assalam," Navarro replied, his pronunciation careful but decent. "Please, call me Richard. Thank you again for making the journey." "The pleasure is ours. I am Karim al-Rashid, as you know. These are my colleagues, Faisal al-Mazrui and Omar al-Thani." The 2 other men nodded politely. "We are grateful for your hospitality and your interest in this opportunity." Everyone settled into seats around the conference table. Layla wheeled the cart closer and began offering coffee, moving efficiently from person to person. Most accepted. Al-Rashid requested Arabic coffee, which Layla's mother had thoughtfully prepared. She poured it carefully into small cups, noting that Al-Rashid accepted it with a nod that seemed practiced, almost rehearsed. Once everyone was settled, Navarro began. "Gentlemen, Jennifer, David, Preston, thank you all for being here. As you know, we're here to finalize what I believe will be one of the most significant investments of my career. The Al Manura Development Project represents an unprecedented opportunity to participate in the transformation of one of the fastest-growing economic zones in the Gulf region." He gestured to Al-Rashid, who stood and moved to a presentation screen at the end of the room. "Thank you, Richard. Let me begin by providing context." His English was excellent, with a British-influenced accent that suggested education in the UK. The Al Manura Project is a joint venture between the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Dubai Department of Economic Development. We are developing a new mixed-use district, residential, commercial, hospitality, on a coastal tract that has been held in reserve for precisely this purpose. Total project value is estimated at $4 billion. We are seeking strategic international partners for the development phase. He clicked through slides, architectural renderings of gleaming towers, pristine beaches, world-class amenities. Everything looked spectacular, the kind of development that promised extraordinary returns. Layla, standing quietly by her cart, watched with professional detachment. She'd seen hundreds of business presentations during her years in Dubai. This one looked polished and professional. "Our partnership structure is straightforward," Al-Rashid continued. "We are offering limited equity positions to qualified international investors. The minimum commitment is $500 million, which secures a 6% equity stake and representation on the development board." He paused for effect. "We project returns of 18 to 22% annually once the project reaches operational phase, which we anticipate within 4 years." 18 to 22% annually. Even Layla, who wasn't a finance expert, knew that was an exceptional return, possibly too exceptional. But she kept her expression neutral and stayed quiet. Jennifer Wu asked a question about timeline and risk assessment. David, whoever he was, asked about market analysis and comparable developments in the region. Preston Harrison asked about legal structure and regulatory compliance. Al-Rashid had smooth answers for everything, supported by documents and data that all looked legitimate. Layla refilled coffee cups when they ran low. She replaced pastry plates. She was professional wallpaper, barely noticed, exactly as she was supposed to be. But she was also listening, because that's what translators were trained to do. To absorb information, to understand context, to catch nuances that others might miss. And something felt off. She couldn't quite identify what, but there was something in the presentation that didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way Al-Rashid answered questions, always smooth, always confident, but occasionally with a slight hesitation, as though he were remembering a script rather than speaking from genuine knowledge. Maybe it was the way his 2 colleagues barely spoke, just nodded at appropriate moments, like supporting actors playing their roles. Or maybe it was just Layla's instinct, honed from years of working in environments where the difference between genuine partnership and sophisticated fraud was often a matter of subtle tells. The morning progressed. More presentations. More documents circulated. Preston Harrison walked everyone through the legal agreements, Pages and pages of dense contract language that Layla couldn't fully follow, but that seemed to satisfy the questions being asked. The documents had official seals, signatures, letterheads from Abu Dhabi government entities. Everything looked legitimate. Around 11:30, they took a short break. Layla refreshed the beverage service while people stood, stretched, made phone calls. Al-Rashid and his colleagues stepped out onto the terrace, speaking in low voices. Layla caught fragments. They were speaking in what sounded like Arabic, though she was too far away to make out actual words. When everyone reconvened, Navarro looked energized, excited. "I think we're ready to move forward. Preston, do you have the final agreements?" Harrison pulled a thick folder from his briefcase. "Everything's prepared. I've reviewed all the documents, verified the governmental approvals, confirmed the partnership structures. This is legitimate and legally sound." He looked at Navarro with an expression of professional confidence. "I recommend we proceed." "David," Navarro looked at the older man. "Your thoughts?" "The numbers work," David said. "Risk is always present in any major investment, but the potential returns justify it. The governmental backing reduces regulatory risk significantly. I think it's a sound opportunity." Navarro nodded, then looked at Jennifer Wu. "Jennifer, I agree. This fits well within our investment strategy. The Gulf markets are positioned for continued growth. Having early entry into a major development project could be highly advantageous." "Then let's do this." Navarro smiled at Al-Rashid. "Kareem, I think we have a deal." Al-Rashid stood and extended his hand. "Alhamdulillah. This is a partnership that will benefit everyone involved." They shook hands, and there was a palpable sense of celebration in the room. The deal was done. All that remained was the signature. Preston Harrison laid out the final documents. "Richard, this is the partnership agreement. Once you sign, we'll initiate the wire transfer as discussed. $500 million to the designated account, with the funds held in escrow pending final governmental approvals and project commencement." Navarro pulled out his fountain pen, an expensive mont blanc, Layla noticed. He opened the document to the signature page. Everything was happening fast now, the momentum of the morning carrying everyone toward the finish line. Layla should have stayed quiet. She should have remained invisible. This wasn't her business, wasn't her concern. She was just there to pour coffee and make sure no one needed anything. But then Al-Rashid said something to his colleagues in what was supposed to be Arabic. He gestured at the contracts, smiled, and spoke those 5 words. Except they weren't words. They were sounds that mimicked Arabic rhythm, but meant nothing. It was like hearing someone fake Spanish by adding "oh" to the end of English words. Technically, it sounded right to someone who didn't speak the language, but to anyone who actually understood, it was obviously fake. Layla's breath caught. She looked at Al-Rashid more carefully. Throughout the morning, she'd assumed he was genuinely from the Gulf region. His English accent suggested British education, which was common among wealthy Gulf Arabs. His dress was appropriate. His mannerisms were convincing. But that fake Arabic, that was wrong. That was impossible to explain away. She watched as Navarro positioned his pen on the signature line. She watched Harrison lean in, pointing to where he should sign. She watched everyone in the room, focused on this moment of completion. And she couldn't stay silent. "That's not Arabic." Her voice cut through the moment like a physical force. Everyone froze. Navarro's pen stopped moving, hovering above the paper. All eyes turned to her. Her mother, standing near the door, looked stricken. Preston Harrison's expression went from surprise to irritation. But Layla kept her focus on Al-Rashid, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," Layla said, her heart pounding. "But what you just said, that wasn't Arabic. It was gibberish." "Excuse me." Al-Rashid's voice was calm but cold. "Young woman, I don't know who you are, but—" "I'm a professional Arabic translator," Layla said. Her voice was shaking slightly, but she forced herself to continue. "I've worked in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Riyadh. I speak modern standard Arabic and multiple dialects fluently. What you just said to your colleagues wasn't Arabic. It wasn't any language. It was nonsense." The room went absolutely silent. Navarro set down his pen. "That's a serious accusation." I know. Layla looked directly at Al-Rashid. If I'm wrong, then I apologize and I'll leave. But I'd like to ask Mr. Al-Rashid a simple question in Arabic. If he's genuinely from the Emirates, if he genuinely represents these government entities, he should be able to answer easily. Harrison stood up, his expression stern. This is completely inappropriate. This young woman is disrupting a confidential business proceeding. Mr. Navarro, I suggest we... Wait. Navarro held up a hand. He looked at Layla with sharp, assessing eyes. What question do you want to ask? Layla switched to Arabic. She kept it simple, using Gulf dialect, the kind spoken in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, the kind Al-Rashid would absolutely know if he was who he claimed to be. She asked him where in the Emirates he was from, which governmental ministry he reported to, and how long he'd been working on the Al-Manara project. Al-Rashid stared at her. For a long moment, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10. He said nothing. His expression went from confident to confused to carefully neutral. Then he responded in English, his voice sharp. I don't appreciate being interrogated by the service staff. This is highly disrespectful. Mr. Navarro, I must insist. She asked you a question in Arabic. Navarro said slowly. His pen was still on the table, nowhere near the contract now. You claim to represent Abu Dhabi government entities. You're presenting yourself as a Gulf Arab businessman. Why didn't you answer her in Arabic? My business is conducted in English, Al-Rashid said, as a standard for international commerce. I don't need to prove my credentials to. Layla spoke up again, her confidence growing as she saw Navarro's doubt. Mr. Navarro, anyone who genuinely works in Gulf state government affairs would understand basic Arabic, especially Gulf dialect. It's not like asking someone to speak a foreign language. It's asking them to speak their native language. The fact that he can't, or won't, is a major red flag. One of Al-Rashid's colleagues, Faisal, said something to him in rapid, quiet tones. It might have been Arabic, but Layla couldn't hear clearly enough to be sure. Al-Rashid responded in English. This is unacceptable. We came here in good faith, and now we're being accused of what exactly? Being unable to satisfy some random staff member's linguistic test. It's not random, Layla said, and now she committed fully, knowing there was no going back. Mr. Navarro, may I look at the documents? Absolutely not, Harrison said immediately. Those are confidential legal agreements. You have no authority. Let her look, Navarro said. His voice was quiet but firm. Something had shifted in his demeanor. The excitement was gone, replaced by careful scrutiny. Harrison's jaw tightened. Richard, I must advise against. I said let her look. Navarro picked up one of the documents, the one with Abu Dhabi government letterhead, and handed it to Layla. Tell me what you see. Layla's hands were shaking as she took the document. She'd worked with enough official Arabic documentation to know what to look for. The letterhead looked professional, correct logos, proper formatting. But when she started reading the Arabic text in the header and certification sections, she saw the problems immediately. This isn't right, she said quietly. The Arabic here, it's grammatically incorrect. Multiple errors. The kind of mistakes that wouldn't happen in an official government document because they have professional translators and administrators who would catch these things. She pointed to specific sections. This phrase here doesn't make sense. This word is misspelled. This entire sentence has incorrect verb conjugation. It's like someone used Google Translate and didn't have an actual Arabic speaker review it. She looked up at Navarro. Official government documents from Abu Dhabi would never have these kinds of errors. Never. They're too careful about their international image, too professional about their communications. These documents are forgeries, probably created by someone who doesn't actually speak Arabic, but wanted them to look official to people who don't speak the language either. The room erupted. Al-Rashid started speaking rapidly, his voice rising. This is outrageous. These documents have been verified, reviewed by legal counsel, confirmed by... By whom? Navarro's voice cut through the noise. He was looking at Preston Harrison now, and his expression was cold. Preston, you told me you verified these documents. You said you confirmed the governmental approvals. Did you actually verify them, or did you just accept what you were given? Harrison's face had gone pale. Richard, I conducted standard due diligence. Did you have an Arabic speaker review these documents? Navarro picked up another page, one with Arabic text along the margins. Did you actually verify these with Abu Dhabi authorities, or did you just trust that the letterheads were real? I trusted the partnership structure, Harrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. The documents appeared legitimate, the certifications. Appeared legitimate to someone who doesn't speak Arabic. Layla interjected. She felt bolder now, seeing Navarro's doubt crystallizing into something harder. But they wouldn't fool anyone who actually reads Arabic. These are sophisticated forgeries, but they're still forgeries. Real governmental documents wouldn't have these kinds of fundamental language errors. Navarro stood up abruptly and pulled out his phone. I'm calling the Abu Dhabi Economic Development Office. Right now. I have contacts there from previous business dealings. He looked at Al-Rashid. If you're legitimate, they'll confirm your identity and the Al-Manura project. If you're not. He left the thread unfinished. Al-Rashid's expression shifted again, this time to something that looked like calculation. He glanced at his two colleagues, then at Harrison, and in that glance, Layla saw it. A moment of silent communication, a shared knowledge, a conspiracy confirmed. Mr. Navarro, Al-Rashid said carefully, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should postpone this signing until we can address these concerns. You're not leaving, Navarro said flatly. He was already dialing. David, please move to the door. Don't let anyone exit. The older man moved quickly, positioning himself between the visitors and the exit. Jennifer, call building security. Tell them we need someone up here immediately. Richard, wait. Harrison stood up, his voice urgent. Let's think about this rationally. We don't need to involve Preston. Navarro's voice was like ice. How long have you been my lawyer? 12 years. Richard, you know I would never. Then why are you trying to stop me from verifying these documents? Navarro's eyes were hard. Why are you defending these men instead of protecting my interests? Unless... He stopped, understanding dawning. Unless you're part of this. The accusation hung in the air. Harrison's expression went through several rapid changes, denial, calculation, and finally something that looked like resignation. You don't understand, he said quietly. The opportunity's available if you just... If I just let myself be defrauded of $500 million? Navarro's voice was shaking with fury. That's what this is, isn't it? A con. An elaborate scam. And my own lawyer was in on it. And this is where everything shifted, because now it wasn't just about stopping a bad deal or exposing fake documents. It was about betrayal from inside, about trust shattered by someone who should have been protecting rather than predating. It was about the truth that had been buried under layers of legitimacy, just waiting for someone who understood the language to expose it. Al-Rashid made a move toward the door. David blocked him. I don't think so. We haven't done anything illegal, Al-Rashid said, but his tone had changed, less confident, more defensive. This is a misunderstanding. A business disagreement. Really? Layla spoke up again. Because I don't think the FBI will see it that way when they investigate the forged government documents. Or when they trace the accounts you wanted the money transferred to. Or when they look into how many other people you've done this to. She was guessing, but apparently guessing right, because Al-Rashid's face went even more guarded. Harrison actually flinched. Navarro's call connected. Yes, hello. This is Richard Navarro calling from Los Angeles. I need to verify some information about a development project. Yes, the Al-Manura mixed-use district. No, I'll wait. He put the call on speaker. The next 2 minutes were excruciating. Everyone in the room stayed frozen, waiting. Finally, a voice came through the speaker. Mr. Navarro, I've checked our records. We have no project by that name in development. There is no Al-Manura district project associated with Abu Dhabi Economic Development or any related entity. I'm afraid someone has given you incorrect information. What about a partnership opportunity for international investors? Navarro asked. $500 million equity positions. We do have various investment opportunities, but nothing matching that description. and certainly nothing that wouldn't be publicly announced and officially documented on our government websites. The voice sounded concerned now. Mr. Navarro, if someone has approached you claiming to represent Abu Dhabi authorities, I suggest you contact. I understand. Thank you. Navarro ended the call. He looked at Al-Rashid with an expression of absolute fury. Who are you really? Al-Rashid didn't answer. His colleagues were looking increasingly nervous. Harrison had sunk back into his chair, his head in his hands. Preston. Navarro's voice was quiet but deadly. How much were they paying you? Harrison looked up, his eyes haunted. 10%. They offered 10% of whatever they got. $50 million. Richard. I have debts, I made bad investments, I thought. He trailed off. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help. But I'm sorry. You were going to let me lose $500 million. Navarro's hands were shaking. You were going to betray 12 years of trust for a cut of a fraud. I convinced myself it was real, Harrison said, but even he didn't sound like he believed it. I wanted it to be real, so I didn't look too carefully. I didn't verify what should have been verified. I failed you. Security arrived, 2 large men who looked ex-military. Navarro gave crisp instructions. Hold these 3 men. Call the police. Call the FBI. I want everyone here until federal agents arrive. No one leaves, no one makes calls. He looked at Harrison with disgust. That includes you, Preston. You're done. The next few hours were chaos. Police arrived first, then FBI agents from the Los Angeles field office. Layla gave her statement multiple times, explaining what she'd heard, what she'd seen in the documents, how she'd recognized the forgeries. Her mother was beside herself, apologizing, worrying that Layla had jeopardized her job, terrified of the consequences. But Navarro pulled them both aside during a lull. Mrs. Hashim, your daughter just saved me from the worst financial decision I would have ever made. She recognized something that everyone else in that room, including people with advanced degrees and decades of experience, missed. He looked at Layla. What's your name? Layla Hashim. Layla. He handed her a business card. I'm going to need you to work with the FBI investigation. They'll need your expertise on the documents, the language, all of it. But after that, I want to hire you. Not as a translator. As a consultant. I clearly need someone on my team who can recognize when I'm being lied to, especially when those lies are wrapped in languages and cultural contexts I don't fully understand. Layla blinked. Mr. Navarro, I'm not a financial expert. I'm a translator. You're someone who pays attention, who trusts her instincts, who was willing to speak up when everyone else was ready to go along with a catastrophic decision. He paused. How much would I have lost if you hadn't been in that room? $500 million, at least. And how much did it cost to have you there? What was your mother paying you to help serve coffee? Layla smiled despite herself. She wasn't paying me. I was doing a favor. A favor that saved me $500 million. Navarro's expression was serious. I'm going to need people I can trust. People who aren't afraid to tell me when something's wrong, even when everyone else is saying everything's fine. That's rare. That's valuable. Think about it. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded. The men calling themselves Al-Rashid, Faisal, and Omar were actually Americans. Derek Matthews, James Sullivan, and Robertson, who'd been running similar scams for years. They'd targeted wealthy investors with sophisticated forgeries, fake partnerships, and elaborate backstories. They'd created entire fictional companies and development projects, supported by websites and documentation that looked legitimate to anyone who didn't dig too deep. Preston Harrison had been recruited to the scheme 2 years earlier. He'd made bad investments, borrowed from the wrong people, and gotten desperate. When Matthews approached him with an offer, help deliver wealthy clients for a percentage of the take, Harrison had rationalized it as a victimless crime. After all, people like Navarro could afford to lose money. Except, as Harrison eventually admitted to investigators, he'd known it was fraud. He'd known he was betraying his clients. He just wanted to believe there was a way out of his financial hole that didn't involve admitting failure. The FBI found evidence of at least 8 previous victims over the past 4 years. Total losses exceeded $200 million. Most victims had been too embarrassed to come forward or had been convinced by their advisors, some of whom, like Harrison, were compromised, that going public would damage their reputations more than staying quiet. But with Navarro's case, with the clear evidence of forgery and fraud, the whole network started to unravel. Layla worked with the prosecutors for months. She analyzed documents, testified before grand juries, explained to judges and lawyers how the forgeries worked and why they were obviously fake to anyone who actually understood Arabic. The defendant's lawyers tried to argue that the language errors were just typos, just careless translation. But Layla systematically demolished those arguments. These weren't typos. These were fundamental mistakes that revealed the documents had never been created by actual Arabic speakers, had never been reviewed by legitimate governmental authorities. The trial was scheduled for the following year. In the meantime, Layla's life changed in ways she'd never anticipated. Navarro made good on his offer. He hired her as a cultural and linguistic consultant for his investment firm. Her job was to review international deals, verify documentation, and provide honest assessment of whether partnerships were genuine or potentially fraudulent. It paid 3 times what she'd made as a freelance translator, came with benefits and equity in the firm, and gave her access to fascinating projects across multiple countries. She also became something of a minor celebrity in the international business community. Articles were written about the Maid's daughter who stopped a $500 million scam. She was invited to speak at conferences about fraud prevention and cultural competency in international business. Universities wanted her to guest lecture on the importance of language skills and due diligence. Her mother was simultaneously proud and overwhelmed by the attention. "I just wanted you to help serve coffee," Aisha kept saying, half laughing, half incredulous. "How did this happen?" "Because you raised me to speak up when something was wrong," Layla replied. "Because you taught me that doing the right thing mattered more than staying quiet and comfortable. I learned that from your mama." 6 months after the incident, Layla stood in a federal courtroom and watched as Derek Matthews, James Sullivan, and Robertson were sentenced to 15, 12, and 12 years respectively for wire fraud, conspiracy, and forgery. Preston Harrison, who'd cooperated with investigators and provided evidence against his co-conspirators, received 8 years and permanent disbarment from practicing law. After the sentencing, several of the previous victims approached Layla. They thanked her for what she'd done, for exposing the scheme, for making sure the perpetrators finally faced consequences. One man, an investor who'd lost $40 million to an earlier iteration of the scam, handed her a handwritten note. It read, "Thank you for being brave enough to speak when everyone else was silent. My family lost everything to these people. Knowing they'll finally be held accountable means more than I can express." Layla kept that note. She kept it in her desk at her new office, where she now worked protecting others from making the same mistakes. On days when the work felt overwhelming, when she had to review dozens of documents and wonder if she'd missed something important, she'd take out that note and remember why it mattered. She thought about that morning in the conference room a lot, about the choice she'd made to speak up despite having no authority, no standing, no reason to believe anyone would listen to her, about how easily she could have stayed silent, served the coffee, collected her mother's thanks, gone home to her apartment and never thought about it again. And Richard Navarro would have signed those documents. $500 million would have disappeared into offshore accounts. The scammers would have vanished. And Harrison would have collected his $50 million for betraying his client's trust. All because no one had been willing to say, "That's not right." Layla had learned something important from that experience. Expertise mattered, yes. But so did courage. So did the willingness to trust your own judgment, even when everyone else in the room had more credentials, more experience, more authority. Sometimes the most important voice in the room belonged to the person everyone assumed didn't matter. She also learned that there was more to translation than just converting words from one language to another. Real translation was about understanding context, recognizing patterns, seeing when something that looked legitimate was actually fraudulent. It was about being willing to look beyond the surface, to question what everyone else accepted, to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable. One evening, about a year after the incident, Layla had dinner with her mother at their favorite Lebanese restaurant. They sat at a corner table, sharing mezzi and laughing about office politics at Layla's new job. Aisha was still working at the Belmont estate. Navarro had given her a substantial raise and bonus after everything that happened, along with his profound gratitude for having raised a daughter with integrity. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't asked me to help that day? Layla asked. Aisha considered this. Every day. I think about it every day. And I thank God that I did because... She trailed off, her eyes getting misty. Because you saved a good man from being destroyed. And you helped bring justice to people who thought they'd never get it. That matters, Habibti. That matters more than anything. Layla reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. I learned from the best. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Aisha smiled. You know, Mr. Navarro told me something last week. He said that meeting, the one you interrupted, was supposed to be the culmination of 6 months of planning. Harrison had been setting it up for months, bringing Navarro slowly into the scheme, building trust, making it seem legitimate. Everything was designed to get to that signature moment, and you derailed all of it with one sentence. That's not Arabic, Layla quoted, smiling at the memory. That's not Arabic, Aisha repeated. 5 simple words, but they changed everything. Layla thought about that later, walking home through the Los Angeles evening. 5 words in English, followed by questions in Arabic that exposed a fundamental lie. That was all it had taken to stop a massive fraud. Not violence, not dramatic heroics, just a willingness to speak truth in a language the liars couldn't fake. She thought about all the other scams that probably succeeded because no one in the room spoke the right language, knew the right context, had the courage to question what everyone else accepted. How many deals went through that shouldn't have? How many people lost money because the one person who could have stopped it stayed silent? Layla couldn't save everyone. She couldn't be in every room where fraud was happening. But she could do her part. She could review documents, verify claims, speak up when something was wrong. She could teach others what to look for, how to recognize the patterns, why cultural and linguistic competency mattered in international business. And maybe, just maybe, she could inspire other people, people who thought they didn't have authority or standing or the right to speak, to trust their instincts, to say something when things felt wrong, to refuse to stay silent just because speaking up was uncomfortable. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is look at something everyone else accepts and say, that's not right. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak truth in a language liars can't fake. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is remember that your voice matters, even when, especially when, everyone else in the room has more power, more credentials, more apparent authority than you do. Layla had learned that lesson in a conference room overlooking the Pacific, watching a pen hover above a signature line that would have destroyed a man's financial future. She'd learned it by trusting herself, by speaking up, by refusing to let injustice happen when she had the knowledge to stop it. And now she got to help others learn the same lesson. One case at a time, one document at a time, one moment of speaking truth at a time. 6 months later, Layla gave a TED Talk about linguistic competency and fraud prevention. The video went viral, over 10 million views in the first month. She talked about that morning in the conference room. She talked about her mother, about the choice to speak up, about the importance of diverse perspectives in high-stakes decision-making. But the part that resonated most with people was when she said, the scammers were counting on silence. They'd built their entire scheme around the assumption that no one in that room would speak Arabic, that no one would question the documents, that everyone would be too polite or too intimidated to challenge what looked official and legitimate. They were almost right, but they made one mistake. They forgot that sometimes the person who doesn't belong in the room is exactly the person who needs to be there. She paused, looking out at the audience. So here's my question for you. When have you been in a room where you didn't think you belonged? Where you had information or perspective that others lacked? Where you saw something wrong, but assumed it wasn't your place to speak up? What happened? And if you could go back, would you speak? The comment section on that video was filled with stories. People who'd stayed silent and regretted it. People who'd spoken up and changed outcomes. People who were inspired to trust their instincts in the future. One comment stuck with Layla. It said, "I'm a janitor at a tech company. Last week I noticed something weird in the trash, confidential documents that shouldn't have been there. I reported it. Turns out there was an insider trying to steal trade secrets. My boss thanked me and said I'd save the company millions. I never thought my job mattered that much. But I guess everyone's job matters if you pay attention." Layla smiled when she read that, because that was exactly the point. Everyone's perspective mattered. Everyone's knowledge had value. And the people who seemed most invisible, the service staff, the support workers, the ones everyone looked past, sometimes had the clearest view of what was really happening. On the 2-year anniversary of the incident, Navarro threw a party at the Belmont estate. He invited everyone who'd been in the conference room that day, except, obviously, the criminals who were now in federal prison. He also invited Layla's mother, the FBI agents who'd worked the case, the prosecutors who'd secured convictions, and about 50 other people who'd been impacted by the investigation in various ways. Navarro gave a speech. He talked about trust, about betrayal, about how close he'd come to making a catastrophic mistake. And then he talked about Layla. 2 years ago, a young woman I'd never met walked into a conference room and saved me from losing $500 million. She had no reason to speak up. She had every reason to stay quiet. She was there as a favor to her mother. She had no authority. She risked looking foolish if she was wrong. But she spoke anyway, because she recognized that silence would have been complicity, because she understood that having knowledge without using it to help others isn't really knowledge. It's just wasted potential. He raised his glass. To Layla Hashim, who reminds us all that sometimes the most important voice in the room belongs to the person we almost didn't invite. Everyone drank to that, and Layla, standing next to her mother, feeling overwhelmed and grateful and still slightly surprised by how her life had changed, thought about that morning 2 years ago, about the choice that had seemed so simple in the moment but had rippled outward in ways she never could have predicted. She thought about the victims who'd gotten justice, the investors who'd been protected from future scams, the business leaders who'd learned to value diverse perspectives and linguistic expertise, the young people who'd heard her story and decided to trust their own instincts, to speak up when they saw something wrong, to refuse to let authority or credentials intimidate them into silence, all because she'd been willing to say 5 words. That's not Arabic. All because she trusted herself enough to challenge people with more power and status and apparent expertise. All because she'd remembered what her mother had taught her, that doing the right thing mattered more than being comfortable. So here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something others didn't? Where speaking up felt risky, but staying silent felt wrong? What did you choose? And looking back, are you proud of that choice? Think about it. And if this story made you think about your own moments of choosing between silence and truth, I'd love to hear about it in the comments.